So are there any questions from the previous class? We are not meeting for a whole week, so because Monday is a holiday, it's Labor Day, I think. Yes?
Yes.
Yep. So a lot of stuff will be on sale, including Android devices. So if you are shopping for an Android device, you might want to use this opportunity and see if you can find a good deal and get one for writing your homework assignments, and just in general can be useful as well. All right. Any questions whatsoever about the class, getting your assignment done, your project? Does anyone have any specific question? Yep, go ahead.
You said you're going to be offering a second part of this class?
Yeah, the second part is going to be offered in spring 2017.
What does that cover, just generally?
Oh, that one uses Android Studio. So we are actually going into Java code and doing the long but flexible way.
Cool.
Yep. So that's usually what we do with. We usually combine like 2 or 3 sections of 362 into one 363 because not everybody in 362 will move on to 363. So that's why we kind of have to wait a few semesters before offering 363. Yep.
Does it usually fill up?
363?
22 students.
It's close. Usually it's really kind of close to the minimum. Yep, question?
Is there a Java requirement for that class?
No, it is not. But it has a core requisite of C and C++. So either you have taken cisp 360 before, or you have to be taking cisp 360 in the same semester. Because the syntax of Java and C is pretty close, so I want people to at least be in a class that talk about C syntax while they are learning Java programming. Yep. All right. So without any questions, I am going to talk about the user interface part, okay? Because that's a good place to start when you're thinking about an app and you want to go like, okay, I want this app to have this screen to collect this kind of input, and when somebody clicks, I want it to move on to that screen and so on. So that's why I want to start with basic user interface, just so that you know what elements or what components are available in at least App Inventor, and how to make use of those components. Okay. So right here we have static screen layout. Okay. In other words, in App Inventor, unfortunately, you do not really have a whole lot of control over the positioning of components. You do have some control, but not really as flexible as in Android Studio or any real actual app development. We'll talk about the layout components in App Inventor. There's horizontal, vertical, and table for layout control. We'll talk about event handling. The whole concept of event handling. Some of this stuff we touched on already. Okay, it's just that this time we'll actually take a deeper look at it. Sample output using a notifier component, which is basically a dialog box, but it's not limited only to a dialog box. There are several ways to use a notifier. And also the properties of a particular quote-unquote screen. Okay, because the screen is actually a very important concept in App Inventor as well as Android development. Okay. So we'll talk about all of these things. These are links to specific programs that I have written. You don't have to download these until we get to the point where we have to deal with this. Don't worry about these sample programs. All right. So let's just go ahead and dive into App Inventor here. And I'll just go ahead and use my apps account. And I'll just start with a new project. Okay, user interface, UI. All right. So this screen, should be familiar by now, okay? Because most of you should have done the homework assignment, Hello Per, and already know how to use App Inventor to a certain point. And in this screen, I already talked about the various components. This part shows you what components are available. By dragging components into the viewer, you are instantiating or you are making use of those components. This is a screen about components. Now you might want to ask, oh, so why do we need components when we already have viewer? Well, the thing about components is it shows you how components are nested. Okay, which one is containing which other one, and so on and so forth. And that can be very helpful when you are trying to just locate and single out one particular control or one particular component. And this last pane here, or the last portion of this screen, is properties. In other words, it's telling you, okay, whatever you have selected, right now I have screen 1 selected. So it's basically saying, okay, whatever is being selected, what are the static properties? In other words, what can you specify about that thing, that component? And those are all laid out in the properties part of the screen. Okay. Are there any questions at this point? This is fairly standard stuff. Okay. All right. So the first thing we know is, okay, from your homework assignment, you should probably know this already, is as you drag components over to the screen or dragging into whatever container, you can order things as you drag it in. In other words, you don't have to always append things at the very end of the stuff that you already have. You can actually insert stuff in between as well. So I'll just give you a quick example here. If you have a label here and you want the button to be appearing below that, you can drag it to the below point. But once you have the button, you can actually drag it to be above it as well. So you can reposition things as you see fit. Okay. So that's something that you can do, and I'm pretty sure some of you have seen that already in the previous homework assignment. And as you can see, if I select a particular component, the properties of that component appears in the properties pane, and as a result, I can now tweak it. Now, you can tweak it either using the properties, or you can also tweak it in the blocks. If you tweak it in the properties, it simply means that when this screen displays, that particular component will have these properties to begin with. It doesn't mean that you cannot change it later on using your own code in the blocks. So I'll show you guys how to do that when you need to change. Oh, I want this label to have a different color, or I want the text to change. We can do all that in the code or in the blocks. Are there any questions about this part here? Okay, so the first popular question is, well, it looks like with App Inventor, the only way to put components into the viewer screen is to put things one after another or in between. But what if I want to have a label and a text box on the same quote-unquote line so that it looks natural? Okay, zip code : and then we have a text box that allows an end user to type in a zip code. So that would be the kind of like a very common question, because it seems to make sense that way. So with this part here, I'm going to delete these components and start from scratch. Okay, so we'll delete this and we'll delete that. Okay. All right. So what we want to do is to say I want a label, and the label, the text on the label says zip code, and I want to have a text box right next to zip code so that to an end user, it's easy to see what that person is entering. I'm entering a zip code. Okay. But it doesn't really let you do that, because if you try to go to a text box and say, I want the text box to be next to zip code, it doesn't let you do it. It's either before or after zip code, okay? Which is not exactly what you want to do. So the way to fix this problem is to use an arrangement, okay? It's called an arrangement. If you scroll down a little bit, you go to layout, then you start to see all these different arrangements. They have, actually, some of these are new. Okay, in the previous class, I did not see the scroll arrangement, but in this case, it does have the scroll arrangement. So a horizontal arrangement allows you to put components sideways, so they will be quote unquote on the same line, and a vertical arrangement does allow you to put things in a vertical fashion. Yep.
Is that taking up the whole screen, or is that a section of the screen?
That's up to you. Okay, so let's go ahead and give it a try. Okay, so I want these to be in a horizontal arrangement, so I just put one here, and then I can rearrange things a little bit as it is here. So the first thing we want to do is to look at the properties of an arrangement itself, not even of the things inside, but of the arrangement itself. So right now I have horizontal arrangement 1 selected, and so the properties are now reflecting that particular arrangement. So the first thing we notice is the alignment. In other words, do we want things to be aligned to the left, centered, or right? Because an arrangement is a container. If you say left, okay, then everything will be flushed to the left. If you say center, then things will be centered on the screen. All the components, all the contained components will be centered. If you say right, they will all flush to the right-hand side. So the typical way is left, but you don't have to use left, okay? And I would even, well, it depends on what you're doing. If you're making a form, it makes more sense to make it left. On the other hand, if you only have like one single button and everything, there's only one thing, then center looks better. Vertical arrangement, is basically the same kind of thing. Does everything flush to the top? Is everything centered vertically, or does everything all flush to the bottom? Now that matters when you have components that are of different heights inside the same horizontal arrangement, okay? Because it does affect how it looks, okay? All right, so we're gonna take the default in both cases. The default for horizontal alignment is left, and the default of vertical alignment is top by default. You can change the background color of the arrangement itself. So the default is actually just saying no background color, or the background color of gray. The height is automatic. Now when you have a height being automatic, it is sort of a rubber band, okay? In other words, depending on what you put inside the arrangement, it will automatically increase or decrease the height of the arrangement itself, okay? That's what automatic means. But you can always force it to be something. If you say fill parents, then it depends on what is containing the arrangement. In this particular case, what is containing this arrangement is the screen itself. So that means if you select fill parent, then it's going to take up the rest of the screen. It's not going to take up the space of the other components of the screen. So in other words, it's not going to push its quote-unquote siblings away, but it will actually use up the rest of the screen. Which makes it kind of interesting. If you have two arrangements and they're both same fill parent, then you have a sibling fight. Because they both want the undivided attention of the parent. So to speak. Is that making any sense? Okay. Yep.
Can you put an arrangement into an arrangement?
Yes, you can. Arrangements can nest. So you can have a vertical arrangement inside a table, and that whole thing is inside a horizontal arrangement. You can nest it as many times and as deeply as you want to, but because the screen only has a limited resolution, so I would say 2 or maybe 3 levels is the top where of what people do. But yes, you can nest it, in theory, in any number of levels. Okay, so are there any questions at this point about horizontal arrangement, or just about any arrangement? Yes?
Just going back to the sibling fight, is there any errors that are going to be thrown if you have?
I don't think
like
so.
that?
It's just that,
Because I've commonly done that. I've actually used fill parent to cover the area and do the functionality that I wanted. But what I'm asking is in the backside, if I roll this out to an app, is there a problem as far as the device accepting that when everything's filled parent?
I think it will push one out of the screen entirely, and it won't be visible unless you scroll, or one would just not be visible because the size is reduced to 0. It depends on the sorting order. Okay, so internal to App Inventor and internal to Android, it has to have a particular order of evaluating the components. Okay, so depending on that order and depending on whether it gives priority to the first one or the later ones, then one will probably take up the entire space. In other words, it's not going to split. If you say 3 components and they're all fill parent, it's not going to split the remaining area into 3 equal parts, where each one will take 1/3 of the remaining area.
Gotcha.
Well, we can always test it. Okay, so I'm not doing anything yet. I'm just describing the properties at this point. Okay. Now the last one here is visible. Now this is actually quite useful because you might want to say, why would I want to make a component that is on the screen and make it invisible? Why?
So that when you trigger an action or an event, it populates. It's now visible because you clicked a certain button.
Yes. Okay, so and you can also emulate the same effect as a multiple screen application by using a single screen, but then you can use arrangements to contain the things into groups, and you can hide the entire group when you say the alignment or the arrangement is invisible. In other words, when you say an arrangement is invisible, not only is the arrangement itself invisible, but everything that it contains will become invisible as well. Yep.
But can that overlap another visible one and then swap?
It will take the space of it.
It can take the space.
Yeah, when it's invisible, then it will take up no space on the screen, so the other one can take up the space. So that would be the only application where you can have two or more components all having field parents, is only one is visible at a time. So it doesn't matter if they are all quote unquote field parent, because only one is visible at a time. All right, so now that we have talked about the basic properties of a horizontal arrangement, so how do we put things into it? Well, there are several ways to do it. You can actually drag it and drop it. Now it looks like right now the arrangement has gotten a lot smaller because it's, remember, it's a rubber band. So now that we have a component inside the arrangement, it would just say, okay, I'll just be as big as needed based on what is inside. So now we're going to drag the text box in. Now when you drag it in, okay, it doesn't let me do that. Yep, it does. Okay. So when it does that, then you can now you have several ways to control the size of everything. You can go to the text box itself, which is a component inside an arrangement, and then you can say, what do you want to do about the text box? In other words, you can make the text box a lot bigger. Okay, you can say the text box is going to take up X amount of pixels. So let's say this takes up about 100 pixels, which is going to be about 1/3 of the screen, in terms of height. So you can see the arrangement itself is also changed accordingly because it's a rubber band. Okay, when the components inside an arrangement changes the size, so will the arrangement itself. It will just be a container to contain everything. On the other hand, if you say, oh, but I do want the container to be bigger by a certain amount, you can always just say, okay, instead of automatic, force this to be 350 to be bigger, or 350 to be bigger than the component. Then you have some empty space here. This is definitely not right, okay, because I'm specifying the arrangement to be 350 pixels. Oh, it is right. Okay, never mind. So 350 pixels is almost the entire screen. This one is only 100. So I actually meant to do 120 here. Okay, so that's why I got wrong here. So 120 is just a little bit bigger, like that. Are there any questions about the relationship between the size of a component inside an arrangement and the size of the arrangement itself? So you can combine those in any way you want, okay, to achieve the result that you want. But it doesn't look right now, okay, because the zip code is all the way to the top, and then the text box is kind of taking up most of the space. So this is where you can say, oh, I don't want top alignment anymore. I want center alignment. Okay. Any questions about this part? Yep.
Is that the bigger box? Is that an image thing? I didn't see.
It's not an image. This box here is actually invisible when you run the program. The arrangement box is actually invisible.
What you click on?
Unless you use a non-default color. The default, if I remember correctly, is actually none. Well, this is black, so it's definitely not what we think is the default. But you can choose.
What is it? What did you drag over there to get the bigger box? What is that?
To get a bigger box?
Horizontal arrangement.
Yeah, this is the horizontal arrangement, and I'm just playing with the height of the arrangement. Is that?
Yeah, I see it. It's all the properties there.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Now, all of these properties can be changed when you run the program. In other words, at runtime, let's say you you want to reflect that something has gone wrong and you want to change the arrangement, the background to red, just so that it stands out and the end user would go like, oh, something is not right. Okay, you can change it at runtime. Okay, in other words, when the program is running, you can use the blocks to control these properties. Okay, are we doing okay so far with this? So far so good, kind of? Okay, all right. The other type of arrangements, you can see that we have vertical and then we have table arrangement. Now table arrangement is a little bit different because with a horizontal arrangement, you can drag things into a horizontal arrangement, as you need. Okay, because there's no fixed number of items in a horizontal arrangement. And the same thing applies to a vertical arrangement. You can keep adding stuff to a vertical arrangement. It doesn't give you a limit. When you're talking about the table, then you have to define how many columns and how many rows you're talking about, okay? Because that has to be a certain constant. So that's why when you look at a table arrangement, it does have a column number, the number of columns, and also the number of rows. So this part, these two numbers are completely missing in a horizontal arrangement or a vertical arrangement. But what these two, or what a table arrangement allows you to do, is to align things. So if you're making a form and you want all the labels to line up and all the text boxes to line up, this is the best way to do it. I mean, you can tweak things using the width and stuff like that, but that's really tedious. But to do it this way is so much easier, okay? So I'm just going to give you a taste of what I mean by that, okay? So let's say I'm talking about entering an address with the address, state, and zip code, okay? Just those 3 items. So I need 3 rows instead of 2, okay? So 3 rows. You can also see with a table arrangement, there's no background color also, okay? So now I can go back to the basic user interface components, drag me 3 labels, okay? So 1, 2, and 3, okay? And so that these will become address, city, and state, and zip code. There we go. Okay, so this is one column. The other column is going to deal with the actual text boxes. So we go to text boxes and just drag 3 text boxes into it. There we go. And you can see how easy it is to align the text boxes because it is a table. If you were to use horizontal arrangements, like 3 horizontal arrangements individually, then you will have a much harder time to align, where the line is, the line between the label and the text box, because they're individual. They're all rubber band and just kind of flexible. So unless you specify the exact number of pixels for each label and also the exact number of pixels per text box, it may not look right. This is a lot easier to do. So are there any questions? Yep.
How we can add a little distance between the text boxes?
Okay, so there are several ways to do it, okay? Okay, let me just repeat the question so that the recorder is recording it. So the question is, how do we add spacing, okay, between those things, okay? So one way to do this is to introduce empty rows, and then you put an empty bitmap onto the empty rows. Okay, so let me illustrate what I mean by that. Okay, so you will need to include 2 empty rows to leave that space between the 3 rows. Okay, so I will have to increase the number of rows to 5, and then I will start to move things around a little bit. So this one is going to become the last one. It's just a little bit harder to grab it because I have to position the there we go. Now it looks like this on this screen, doesn't mean it's going to look like this in the actual app. Okay, so just to illustrate my point here, let me start up the simulator so we can see what it looks like. Okay. think it's called AI Starter. Okay. This is what I need to do in Linux to start up the AI companion so that the emulator would work. In Windows, it's a little bit easier. You just double click on an icon. So we do connect, emulator, and just let it start up, okay? So you do have to kind of keep in mind that what you see in the viewer is not necessarily what you see in the app, okay? So to really test what it looks like, it's best to run it in the simulator.
You need to charge your emulator.
Perfect. Hit that 50%.
It's always at 50%. And that's actually, by the way, that's Android 2.3, which is a very ancient version of Android. I used to have a phone with the same version. All right, there we go. See how it's different? So, you know, it has some gap in between, you know, because of the introduction of 5 rows, but, you know, it's not, it doesn't look anything like on the other screen. Yep. Yep.
If you wanted more space, couldn't you just take a label, give it, let's say, 20 pics of?
Yeah, you can use either you can use a label, you can use a
Center it.
bitmap.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would use a bitmap because a bitmap, you know, means it can be very small as well. Yep. Question?
Once you fill in information into that, and you send it off to the database, how would you go about doing that?
That may not be something that we can get to today because the focus of today is really just the layout of the screen and the user interface components. So we'll kind of defer that discussion until a later class, okay. Or during lab time. I can show you how to do it during lab time. Okay. All right. So are there any questions at this point about the two arrangements that I have talked about? The horizontal arrangement and also the table arrangement. No questions? Yep, go ahead.
I noticed in the UML diagrams there's a layout or a layered diagram as one of the options. Is that normally what that's for?
No, it does not.
Oh, it's not.
Yeah, things have to be exclusive. You know, you cannot have one thing on top of another thing. Yep. All right. Any questions? So just to illustrate, the visibility thing affects the entire thing. So if I want to go here and I say, okay, let's turn off the visibility of this whole arrangement. Okay. So it will disappear from here. It's still there. It's just not visible. But in the emulator, it is the same. So this is why components is useful, because you can no longer see in the viewer because it is invisible, but inside the component you can still see that, oh, I have a hidden table arrangement. By clicking visible, it reappears. Yep.
Can you in the block section make it reappear by some kind of action? Like
Yes,
clicking it?
yes you can. Yep. So let me show you the code to do that. Okay, so that's a really good question. So we are moving on to blocks or event handling programming now. Okay, so we're switching gear a little bit. So to trigger an action, there are several ways to trigger an action, but the best way to do it is just by using a button. So I'm going to push, I will put the button outside of the arrangements just so that, you know, I don't pull the rug under myself, right? So I put the button here, and the button is going to say toggle visibility. Now the word toggle means that if it's on, it will become off, and if it's off to begin with, it will become on. Okay, it would just change the state to the other state. So now we want to look at the code and go like, okay, so how do we do this? Now remember, this is object-oriented programming. So when you look at object-oriented programming, the first question you ask when you want to say, okay, so how do we do this? The first question is not how, but who is doing it. Okay, that's the shift from procedural programming, which asks the question how, to object-oriented programming, where the first question is who. Okay, who in terms of objects or components in this case. So the trigger of everything is the button, because I'm clicking the button to initiate the operation. So the answer to that question is the button. Okay, the button is the thing that will basically start off everything. So you look up this blocks here, and if you scroll down, you will see all the components that we have already included into this particular app. And here's button 1. Okay, so you click button 1, and it will show you all the things that button 1 can do. The ones that start with when blah 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 do, they are the event handlers. In other words, certain components have event handlers because there are things that can happen with that thing that triggers the execution of code. A button obviously has event handlers because what is the whole purpose of a button?
To click it.
Yeah, so that somebody can click it, okay? So the clicking of a button generates an event, and an event handler let you specify what to do when that happens, okay? Now one thing that I want to kind of talk about, even though it's not really a big point in this class, is an event is usually asynchronous, okay? So what is the meaning of that word asynchronous?
Happen at any time?
It can happen at any time, very good. In other words, it is not synchronized with anything, okay? The software, the program, the app cannot predict when the next click is going to come in. It's an external event, and the timing is up to the user to decide, okay? So that's what we call asynchronous event.
Sorry, can you write it down on the board, the word?
Yep, asynchronous of or requiring a form of computer control timing protocol in which a specific operation begins upon reception of an indication signal of a preceding operation has been completed. That's a pretty long way to say asynchronous. Not going at the same rate is not exactly the right definition. It's just that there's no agreement. There's no way to predict. Okay, no agreement, no way to predict between two parties. Okay. So the opposite of asynchronous is synchronous. Okay, where things happen in a lockstep manner. Okay. In terms of communication, asynchronous communication usually means there's not really a whole lot of handshaking. Okay, in other words, you can keep sending information. The other side is basically saying, okay, I cannot handle your transmission speed, but you keep transmitting anyway.
UDP is
UDP is has no flow control because you're just sending a datagram. In other words, you are right. Okay, it is not synchronous in any way because there's no flow control.
So video streaming is off because we don't care if it's 50 minutes long.
It's yeah, they are actually doing flow control, but not using the transport layer.
Okay.
They are doing the flow control using the application layer.
Okay.
Whereas TCP is building in the flow control in the transport layer. Yep. Okay, all right. So with a button, we have a few things that we can do. Typically, you just use click, but sometimes long click is useful as well. So I'll just use click this time. All right, so now whatever block I put in here is the things that it will do when button 1 is clicked. Now remember what I want to do. I want to toggle the visibility of at least one of the arrangements, okay? So remember object-oriented programming, okay? So what do I focus on? Not the what, but who, right? So who is going to do something? The arrangement is going to do something, right? So you have to say, okay, table arrangement number 1, let's see what you can do. This is object-oriented programming because I'm thinking in objects first, then what to do with it, okay? So I want to change the visibility. So out of all these options here, the only one that makes sense is this one here. Now there are two that looks almost the same, but they are different. Is this one versus this one. Now you can see the puzzle notch and tab is different. This one gives you a value that you can utilize in something else, okay? But it's not giving you control. It's just telling you, is it visible right now or not visible right now? That's what it's telling you. But you cannot change whether it's visible or not. The other one that looks like this is the one that you can plug into the event handler. Okay, so let me see if I can plug in the wrong one. Yep, go ahead.
Is that basically a Boolean value?
It is Boolean. It's either true or false.
Okay.
Okay, so if I click on this one, okay, so I drag it, I just click it, and I try to put it here. It won't click, see? If I turn on the speakers, you will actually hear that click sound when things snap together, which is a very, it's only in App Inventor that you get that audible feedback that yes, you got it right, okay? In text programming, you never get something like that, right? I mean, Eclipse, doesn't give you a ding to say that yes, this line looks good to me. A VI will never do that, right? VI doesn't say anything, whatever, right? Okay, so it doesn't snap, which means this is not the right kind of thing to get in here. This is actually quote unquote the syntax of App Inventor. It doesn't give you the syntax like yes, you have to use this word first, then the open parenthesis, then this, and this. It just says okay, what snaps and what does not snap. Okay, which I think is great for people who are new to programming. It's a little tedious for people who are already experienced and just want to keep coding. Okay, because you have to keep dragging and dropping. Okay, so let's try the other one. The other one is set table arrangement one dot visible. Ah, this one does snap. Okay, all right. So you can now see a triangle here, and if you click it, it tells you what is wrong. Okay, it says it's a syntax error, blah 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 blah. But what it really is complaining is there are too few arguments. In other words, I claim that I want to set the visibility of table arrangement one, and yet I did not specify what the new value is supposed to be. Okay, so that's why we see a little symbol saying that this is no good. So what we need to do now is to actually specify what the new value. Okay, now remember what we are trying to do. We're trying to toggle the value. If it was visible before when you click the button, I want it to turn invisible. If it's invisible to begin with, when I click the button, I want it to turn it into visible again, right? So that means if visibility was true, I want to turn it into false. If it was false, I want to turn it into true. What logical operator can do that?
Not.
Not. Negation. Very good. Good job. So now we specify not. And out of all these tabs here, where do you think not is located?
Logic.
Logic, very good. So let's click logic here, and sure enough, not is here, and this is where we need to access the current visibility as a Boolean value. So we pick out this thing that we threw into the trash can earlier, and that's it. This is the code to toggle the visibility of an arrangement. Okay. Well, when I claim this is the solution of something, you guys always have to ask, okay, show me. Because occasionally I make mistakes and show you something that actually does not work, right? So we look at the emulator and you just say toggle, 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 toggle. Okay, it works.
That's pretty nice. You don't have to compile it or save it or anything. It's just you do it and then it's right there.
Yeah, but as you will find out, if your app requires multiple screens, you will lose this convenience. Because when you have multiple screens, whatever screen you're working on, your AI companion, your App Inventor companion will switch to that screen automatically, which means it becomes impossible to test the app itself when you have a multi-screen application. So when your app starts to have multiple screens, then you will have to
Or you just have to know that it's going to switch you to the other screen that you're working
Well,
on.
you can do that, okay? You can do that, but there's also a different problem because when it switches between the screens, it's really just switching visibility of the screens and not really starting the screen from scratch. So the initialization event does not get generated again, and that can cause problems because the way you run the program inside App Inventor is no longer matching what the end users will be doing. But we are not too concerned about that just yet because we are not going to be talking about multiple screens yet. Okay. So in terms of visibility, are there any questions about visibility? No questions? Any questions about the concept of an event handler. Like in this case, we have a button click event handler. No questions? All right. Well, if there are no questions about that, I'm just going to go back to my notes here, just as a reminder of what else I'm supposed to be talking about. So we are done with the layout part. I did not spell out everything there is to know about arrangements because you can look it up and read it. Okay, let me show you what I mean by that. Yep.
Where do you get that emulator?
The emulator?
That one that you're running?
I use Connect and then Start Emulator. But you have to pre-install AI setup on your computer first.
So it's all through App Inventor.
And then from there, it is all up to App Inventor. Yep.
The emulator, is that different than the Android Studio emulator?
It is a little bit different.
Oh, 'cause I have to install something else.
The main difference is this one ties in with a program that goes along with it. Okay, let me show you what I mean by that. So if I switch back to this text box here, this is actually, do you guys remember that I had to run this kind of long-ish command to start the whole thing? So what this command does, the equivalence of this in Windows is just an icon, you double click it, but it will do the same thing. It will give you a text box and then you will see the rest being exactly the same. So what this thing is a very tiny little web server. It is a web server, okay, except it's listening to localhost. So that's why the port it's listening to is 127.0.0.1, and then the port number is a not typical port. It is 8004. Okay, so that's what this program is doing. It's basically just starting up a web server that is distributed with AI setup or App Inventor setup. Okay, and what it does is a web server, and the purpose of this is a bridge. It's a bridge between the JavaScript code that we are running inside the browser, which is what we see as App Inventor, and the control of the actual emulator. Okay, let me draw a picture. I know this is a little bit technical, and you don't need to know this for the most part, but since the question was asked, I feel obligated to answer it. So when I say something like that, that usually means, one half of the class can just kind of go like, okay, it's not relevant, I'm going to take a little nap here, and then the other class would go like, oh, this is actually good stuff, because the other stuff I, feel a little bit bored about.
Did we talk about the AI companion app? That sounds pretty cool.
It's at the beginning of, when you need to select how you develop your app. So I touched on that, may not be in very detail, in a whole lot of detail, but we touched on it a little bit when we talked about the different ways you can develop your app. So what I want to do, since you asked that question, that means we have a little bit more necessity to talk about it. I don't like things that are slanted. I used to like photography a lot, and I like landscape photography, and it really just bothers me when my pictures are not like horizontally aligned. So I got this is back in the good old days when you can install alternative focusing screens on an SLR. Okay, well these days you don't need that anymore because your camera is just it's just a computer, so you actually get the horizontal screen projected if you need to select it.
And then you have Lightroom where you can tweak it.
Yeah, I would not be surprised if cameras will come to a point where it's a gimbal, where it's actuated, and you just have to say, okay, I want to arrange, I want alignment, and it will just automatically align itself. Those days are coming. They already have drones, by the way. They already have drones where they are programmed to run circles around the subject and keep filming automatically. You don't have to program it.
You did talk about it. You said that we can't really use it here because we can't go Wi-Fi to Wi-Fi.
Right.
But you could also just
No. But the emulator works. It's just that if you have a real app, then AI Companion does not work.
Right.
But if you're running the emulator, then the emulator will still work. Okay, so just a quick picture to show you what we're dealing with here. So we have app inventor running inside a browser. Okay, so this is a browser, can be Firefox, Chrome. Okay, just not Internet Explorer, because I think the websites explicitly say it does not run well inside Internet Explorer. So the App Inventor thing is in JavaScript, so I'm just going to put JavaScript in parentheses here. So App Inventor, the user interface is all written in JavaScript so that you can interact with App Inventor. Then we have the AI setup software here, AI setup, okay, which is a web server. Web server, okay. And then on the other side we have the emulator. So this is an Android emulator. Oh, we're running out of space on that side. There we go. All right, so there are three pieces to what you are seeing on the other screen. Okay, so we have App Inventor allowing me to make changes to the app and specify the blocks and stuff like that. AI setup is for the most part hidden. Okay, we don't need to see it once I start it. And then the Android emulator is running AI Companion inside the emulated Android device. Okay, so ultimately what we want to do is for App Inventor to communicate with the emulator. So when you add a new component to your screen, it is reflected in the emulator in real time, and you don't have to compile anything and do anything else. Okay, so that's what we want to do. However, the problem is, in order to talk to Android emulator, we have to use ADB, which stands for Android. Is it Development Bridge or Debugging Bridge? Okay, but it's something bridge. Okay, now I have to find out. ADB stands for Android something bridge. So what is the D? Debug. Okay, you're right. Because it could have been development as well. All right. So we want this component to talk to this component. Okay.
The Android emulator is a program running on both machines.
Yes. Yeah. All of these are running inside the same physical box. So they're all running on this computer at this point.
But it's not a website or anything like that. It's actually a program.
Well, the website is supplying the JavaScript code to run App Inventor.
Okay.
So that part is outside. So the cloud is interacting only with App Inventor. But App Inventor, in return, needs to interact with the emulator. So the problem is this, okay? The problem is you don't want JavaScript to be able to control any program that is running locally. Why not?
Security.
Because of security issues. Because if JavaScript, which can be on any website, can run and and specify the behavior of programs already installed on your computer, you're running a really, really bad security risk here. Okay, because then you can say, oh, let's go ahead and start up a shell here and make it a remote shell and tell me what the port number is so I can remotely log into your machine and do all kinds of nasty stuff, right? So we don't want that to happen. On the other hand, JavaScript, being a scripting language that runs in a browser, already has the ability to talk to websites. Okay, so it doesn't have a problem saying, oh, we need to go to this website and grab a few images, and I need to go to that website and grab an HTML document, and stuff like that. That JavaScript has no problem with, because that's what a browser does, right? I mean, it goes onto the web and grabs stuff and displays it. So that's why we have this little web server here, because the communication between these two is just using HTTP, which stands for Hypertext Transport Protocol. And that is perfectly okay, not a problem. JavaScript dealing with websites, not a problem. Except in this case, it's not really a website, it's just a web server, okay? So that this thing can, in return, talk to the emulator. So that's why they need to set up these three components on the computer so that what you see on my screen works. You don't have to understand this whole thing. If this is like it's not a problem. But if you think, oh, okay, I see why, how things work out, inside the computer, this is exactly why. In a way, it is very ingenious. Okay, in a way, it's very ingenious, so that your JavaScript running in your browser can now remotely control your emulator. Yep.
Would that be considered web services then to that web server?
It's a web server. It's opening port to 8004.
Okay, that's the port right there.
Yeah. So over here, the interface is 8004, port 8004.
Okay.
And the JavaScript already knows about the port number, and it already knows it's a local host, so that's why it can do this. It's really quite ingenious. All right, so with this out of the way, I know this is a little digression, but I just kind of felt compelled to explain this.
And the emulator needs to be installed, and the web server comes with.
Yeah, these two components are together.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they come as, basically we know the entire package as AI setup, but inside it has two basic components. One is a web server, and the other one is the emulator. Is that okay? All right, cool. All right, so what we need to do next, following my notes here, okay, we just talked about event handling a little bit. So now we move on to outputting something using a notifier, okay? In other words, if you have something to tell the end user, okay, let's say the end user is supposed to put in a zip code, and somehow you determine what the input is not a zip code, what do you do and tell the end user and say, hey, this is not a zip code, blah, 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 okay? That's what notifiers are for. And to use a notifier, the first thing we need to do is to include a notifier component, which looks like this, into the application. Now, when you do this, you will notice that a notifier is actually a non-visible component. Now, it doesn't seem to make sense. Okay, we want to use this to tell the end user something, and yet it is not a visible component. Well, when it says it's not visible, it means it's not always visible. It doesn't say that it cannot do something that it is visible. Okay, so that's why it falls into the non-visible component side, because it's not always visible. It won't be visible, nothing is visible until you say, hey, display this on the screen. Are we doing okay so far with this? How to get started with a notifier? Okay, now that we have a notifier component in this app, the next thing we can do is to explore. Now there are several ways to explore. You can use the help screen to explore as well. But I like to do things in a more interactive way. So I'm going to do this here and say, okay, notifier 1, tell me what you can do. And it starts off with some really confusing event handlers. How do I know the first two are event handlers? After choosing and after text input, how do I know they're event handlers?
The word
When. Very good. And also the color, okay? You might have noticed that things are actually color coded in App Inventor, okay? When it has this kind of brownish color, bokeh brownish color, it is actually meaning that it is a event handler, okay? So we're not going to deal with the event handler. We'll go ahead and talk about the other stuff first. So if you hover your mouse pointer over some of these, if not all of these, it will give you some help messages interactively. So if I hover over this, it says dismiss a previously displayed progress dialog box. Okay, well that may not be something that we want to do. Let's say I just wanted to display a message and say, okay, the table arrangement is now visible, or the table arrangement is now invisible. Okay, I just want a text message to reflect something that you can also see just visually. Okay. This one is log error. It sends a message to the Android system log, which is great for debugging. It does not display anything on the screen, okay? But it does, it is logged in the Android log file, which is great for debugging because if it is displaying on the screen, once it gets past that point, you can no longer see and say, oh, okay, there was this message. But if it's in the system log, they can always check the log and get it back. Okay, so these are all log, just different types of different levels of log. This is really standard in a Linux system because Android is built on top of Linux. So there are three usual logs. One is for errors, which are really bad, things have gone wrong, okay? Things have gone wrong. The next level up is a warning, which means, well, you might want to know this, okay? But it's not too bad, okay? Things have not gone wrong yet. And the last one is just info, which means for your information, blah, blah, blah has just happened, okay? Most likely it's not something that is of interest, okay? But I'm telling you anyway, just FYI, okay? Yep.
Could you hold information for retrieval later there?
Say again?
In general Android applications, can you hold information and log into message?
I think you have to install an app to do that. In other words, the stock Android system does not give you the ability to read the logs. In a Linux system, in all Linux systems, there are log files, and it's the same thing on an Android system because the underlying operating system is just Linux. So the files are being maintained by the Linux operating system, but at the Android level, okay, you have ways to put things into it, but to pull that thing out, there are no default apps to do that. But there are apps that you can install to look into this.
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether you need root access or not, because you might need a rooted phone to see those messages. That's what I'm thinking.
But as a developer, can you pull from that information? It's not an
Let's
important
check.
question. I was just wondering if things can be stored there and retrieved later.
Okay, so you can download the ADK, the Android Development Kit, or get a program called alogcat. Cat is the program to type a file, to display a file. That's why it's called cat. With Android 4.1, the full system log is only visible if you have root. So as I suspected, it's a root thing. So you have to have a rooted device to do that.
So those apps can see their own log messages. So maybe there's a way in there in App Inventor to look at the log.
I don't think so. It's because it requires root access. That means if you have a stock device, you won't be able to show it. I can look for that. App Inventor view system log. Oh, okay. Let's say display the entire. Okay, so let's check out display entire. Okay. The Android log and ADB. So if you can go through ADB to do it, and the command to do that is okay. So logcat is the actual command in ADB to do that. Okay. Does anyone want me to show you guys how to use ADB in conjunction with App Inventor so you can see the system log? Okay, I'll do it. It's just that if you don't feel you need to know this, it's okay. Just kind of take a nap. If you feel that, hey, this is something that I might want to use to debug my application and something in general is useful, because the concept of using a log file and logcat and ADB is not limited to App Inventor. This is actual Android development. Okay, so I'm going to show you guys how to do that. All right. So what you need to do is to drop down to a particular command line. Okay, which one you want to use is up to you, depending on your system. So we go to App Inventor. It has already installed all kinds of commands for App Inventor. So the first one I want to know is ADB, and I want to say status. Oops, it's not. Okay, these are all the commands with ADB. There are ones that can install packages, push to send a file, pull to receive a file, and we want to say devices. There we go. So I want to see what devices are connected, and it shows emulator 5554, and here's the device. Do you remember where we saw this number 5554? It has been shown several times in this class already, but it's at a place that most people do not focus on. is on the title bar of
The emulator.
the emulator. Correct. Actually, it's right here. The title of the emulator says 5554, which reflects the port number, okay, to talk to the emulator. All right, so what we want to do is to look up the ADB command and find out how to do the logcat. So I want to go back to here, just kind of visually search through this and look for logcat. This is backup, uninstall, reverse. Logcat is right here. So ADB logcat is for viewing the device log. So there we go. So we say /ADB. Now in Windows, you don't have to use the / if you're in the folder that contains the command. Then we say logcat, and this is the log. It gives you all kinds of stuff. Okay, you know, everything that's even trivial stuff. It keeps going like this. Because you know anything that goes into the log, even if it's just info, it will do it. So, is that okay? I mean,
What was it? I missed the command. It's ADB.
Oh, okay.
Space,
logcat.
Just logcat. Okay.
Yeah, just logcat. And you can supply a filter after that too. So if you are only interested in errors, you can display just the errors.
Okay, there's a flag that you can set.
Yeah, it's according to the help of ADB, that's what it said. Because according to the help, there's logcat.
You have a lot of options, but you can grab and you can.
Yeah, it says right here, you know, there's a filter spec, so you can specify, you know, a filter, and by that I assume it means you can filter, you know, based on which app, what kind of error message and stuff like that.
One more follow-up question.
Go ahead.
Information in the system log, is that going to be every single action event that was triggered for everything that's going on?
Pretty much, yes.
Yes?
Yep.
So then you could actually, if you had an app, if you were building an app that could access the system log, you could take events that happen from another app and then do something with those, take that information and do something
Correct.
with those?
And that's why that's why you need root access to get to the system log.
Gotcha.
Because it is it's really, you know, sensitive, because you know if you can get, you know, like all the keystrokes from the
Exactly.
keyboard, then you can hack, you know, somebody else's, you know, password really easy.
Yeah.
Yep.
Or, for instance, what I was thinking is that as you caught things on Pokemon Go,
Mhm.
then you could send stuff out of like what you caught, where you caught it,
Mhm.
and that could sync with, you know, any type of social network or anything else as opposed.
Yes, potentially, absolutely. Yep. But I am in a, but ADB is special because when you run ADB and you connect to a device that allows ADB to run, to connect to it, you are a developer, or you are assumed to be a developer,
Right.
and as a result, you know, the trust is established
Right.
that you know what you're doing and you're not trying to hack something.
So systems logs never really open and available in a normal scenario.
That's correct.
Okay.
And that's why if you want to install an app on Android to see the system log on the device itself, you need to have a rooted device, because otherwise it just won't let you access it.
Yeah.
Yep. But when you run ADB, you're already assuming that you're a developer, and as a result, you know, you're trusted to know what you're doing, and it allows you to do that.
Is there another way of grabbing that events-related information from an app that is just, you know, totally separate?
I think, you know, even you will still need root access, because what you can do is to go to /var/log and actually, you know, get to the files that contain the log messages. But for that to happen, you still need to be a rooted user. I mean, you still need a rooted device to do that.
So in order to listen to other apps' events, you have to have that root access.
It's really kind of okay. There's several levels to the logging, the log mechanism. In Linux, there is a daemon, which is a program that runs in the background that doesn't have any user interface, called a log daemon. So the log daemon collects logs from all over the place, the system, apps, and whatnot. And the job of the log daemon is to say, okay, what do I do with all these incoming things to log? If it is configured to put everything into a file, it would do that. But that doesn't have to be the case. It can also just send it out to the network, someplace else, and whatever, you know, you want to specify. Yes?
if this is the case and it's really difficult to reach our logs in App Inventor, how are we supposed to debug if we can't just put in like, if we can't just be like, yo, I'm just gonna put in a print statement right here that says okay, console.log whatever, or I guess in Java it would be console.print and whatever.
Well, I mean, but you can go through ADB to do it. I mean, that's not really that difficult.
Okay. You can see the logs of the app you're developing in.
But it will also give you the log of everything else if you don't filter. So
If you don't
when you
filter,
use,
okay.
yeah, if you just say logcat, it will include everything. I mean,
Can you do it within the development environment? Can you see the logs within
Nope.
the development? No, not at all.
Mm-mm.
So, okay, so the point of writing to a log for us, for debugging, is kind of,
Well, if
Okay.
you're using the emulator, you're just going to see the logs for the emulator because that's the only device you're connected. Oh, but I see. It would still show the system, Unix system, not necessarily just the app.
Well, no, because you're going into the folder of the app debugger bridge. You weren't going into the system log of the computer itself.
No,
You're going into the file.
He was going into the system log of the emulator,
Yeah,
which
exactly.
may not be
Okay.
only your application.
Yeah. I see your point. I see
the
your
clocks and all that.
Yeah.
Okay, so for those of you who want to know a lot more about Logcat and how to filter it so that you can see just messages related to your app, so this is the, I guess, the source of everything. So the command syntax, let me just kind of zoom in here. So the syntax of the command is adb logcat, and then you specify options and then filter spec. And then the options include, do you want to clear the entire log and just exit? Do you want to dump the log to the screen and exit? Because otherwise it will keep itself open. In other words, when new log entries come in, it will display on the screen. In other words, this program does not exit automatically. If you specify a -d, then it does exit after dumping everything. But the interesting part is the filtering part. So let me scroll forward to filtering. There we go. So filtering says you can specify the tag of a message is a short string indicating the system component from which the message originates. And then the priority is based on, okay, this is where the term error, info, and warning comes along. Okay, because they are basically a priority in the log. You can obtain a list of tags using the system together with priorities by running logcat and observing the first two columns of each message given as priority /tag. So let's switch back to the terminal and take a look at this one here. So you can see, it is, okay, so it has a D/app in IMV HTTPD. So there's a letter D to indicate the priority. This one has an I to indicate the priority. And then this is the source of that log entry. This is the HTTP daemon inside the emulator. And this one is a global, which means it can come from anywhere. So when you look at this, it specifies, okay, exactly that. This is info, I stands for info, and D stands for debug. So your app has only control over whether it's info, warning, or error. Is that okay so far? All right, so what I want to do is to use this and test what if I log an error in my app, okay, that I'm doing right now. Okay, so we'll go ahead and just do that. We say log info in this case. Every time we click a button, we log a message. And I'm going to show you something that I haven't really talked about yet, is how to concatenate a string so that it looks right, okay? So we'll go ahead and put several pieces together into one long string, and the operation is called a join, okay? So the join operation is going to say, the first part is just plain text, and I'll use the literal string here to specify the table, okay, visibility is, okay. And then the second part is really just the current state of the visibility. So I'm going to duplicate this code and put it here. So it will say visibility is true or visibility is false and log it to the system. Okay? This should be in the, yeah, go ahead.
Do you want to give it a keyword you can grab on? Or you just grab on visibility?
Well, I just want to see what it looks like in the log. Then we can figure out, what is considered to be the source of this. Then we can
Okay.
use that for filter. So I switch back to the app here and toggle a few times. This will leave a few messages in the log window. Okay, so we just say, okay, show me again. And it has, okay, see right here? It doesn't say from which program. I think that's what the 288 is about. That's the process ID. And then it says notifier visibility is true.
So notifier is the component that it's coming from.
Notifier is the component it's coming from, and then but which app is generating this? That's what the 288 is. So the 288 is the process ID specific to this program. So if you want your debugging to be a little bit easier, what you can do is to make a kind of awkward string, okay, that is unlikely to be in the message of something else. Then you can go through grep and just filter that. Okay, since I got here already, I might as well just do that too. So I'm gonna say, instead of just saying visibility, you just put in some string that is kind of oddball, like tags app colon. Okay, so that is unlikely to happen in some other apps. Okay, so in the text or in the command line here, this time I pipe it through grep tags app. Okay, grep is a filter. It's a command line tool that is a filter. In other words, it will only show things from the input that has tags app as a part of the string. So when I do this, apparently something else already has text. No, these are coming from errors. Okay, so that's a different source. But when I go back to my app and just toggle a few times, then we should see on the command line, oops, text app visibility is true, false, true, false. So this makes it a lot easier to read because it's no longer cluttered by all the other stuff that's going on. So it might come in handy, okay, depending on what your app is doing and what you need to do to debug your app. This can come in handy because it can print whatever you want. Yep.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just had a quick question because I just was thinking about how I would debug some other code, and I'm just wondering, can you define sub functions and subroutines in App Inventor?
Yeah.
And then can you get full stack traces and things like that?
No, you cannot stack trace, but you can have functions.
Okay.
I'll just say that before apps, before mobile devices, we had mainframes. We talked about mainframes in this class already. So if people can debug the programs back in those days by running batch jobs on punch cards, I think we can debug apps on a mobile platform with the log capability. Okay.
Without a GUI.
Oh, without a GUI, with or without a GUI, I mean, that does not matter. It's really just a matter of looking at the symptom and then reversing back and say, okay, what can cause that to happen?
So on Windows, you said we just go to that directory you showed and then type A.
Yeah, in Windows, what you want to do is to find out where AI setup is installed.
Oh, okay.
That's typically under program files and stuff like that. It should be fairly obvious. It should be in App Inventor or MIT something. So look for either M or A. Okay. So when you find that folder, you will find the same directory structure. So one folder is going to be called commands for App Inventor, and then ADB is going to be in it.
Okay.
So it will have the same folder structure as what I have in Linux. It's just that when it is installed in Linux, it's installed under /usr/Google, but in Windows, it's going to be installed under program files, somewhere.
Somewhere, yeah.
Yeah, but I don't remember the parent folder's name. It can be App Inventor, it can be App AI Setup, can be MIT App Inventor, one of those things.
Fine. And then when you run logcap, do we have a correct in Windows?
I guess it depends on which version of Windows. The newer Windows may have that. So if you look at Windows grab command line, no, I guess not. Oh, okay, it has fine
Oh,
string.
fine string,
Yeah.
okay.
So it has something that may be equivalent to that.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, any other questions? Now you can see that I don't have the answer offhand for many of these questions. So the key is to know where to look online, and knowing what keywords to look is really the important part. If you just say Windows search, it's gonna give you some totally irrelevant results. But if you refine the search to what I did, I think grep is the keyword here and command line is the other one, then the first link is the answer. So knowing how to use Google is really a trick, but it's really useful down the line as well. All right, so we spent a lot of time kind of digressing to talk about the notifier, but okay, I know it's a digression from the original direction of this class. However, that is beneficial to debugging your app, okay, in this class, but it's also in general useful as well. Okay, so in the next class, in 363, it's going to be useful as well. So it's good techniques to learn. If you can learn it, if you can absorb it, it's good. If you can't, it's okay. I'm not going to test you guys and say, what is the command line to do, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's not going to happen. Yep.
Could you create a pop-up window that shows you
Yes.
variables?
That was the intention. That was where I was going.
Okay.
Then I sidetracked it myself. So the notifier has a lot of ways to create stuff that is a log. So one way, or the most useful way, or the most common way to show the end user something is down here. Now show alert is just going to pop up the message, but it will dissolve automatically after a second or so. Okay, so that's not what you want to do if you want it to stay in the dialog box. So any one of these would do it, but they're slightly different. Show message dialog is probably what you want to do because it will just pop up the dialog box. It allows you to specify the title of the dialog box, a message, which is the main body of the dialog box, and also what the button, the only button, will say at the bottom of the dialog box. So you can now say, okay, the title says warning, and then the message says the zip code does not exist, and then the button can say close, or return to editing, or something like that. Yep.
Do you actually need to add a button component for that?
No.
Or is that button included?
No, that
in
button
the
is
notifier?
that button is put into the dialog box by this component.
By the-
Yeah, so it's all done automatically.
Okay.
So this is one good one. And then the other one is more general, and it's cancelable. It's called show text dialog, which if you look at these two, they look almost exactly the same, with only one difference. This one has cancelable, so you can display the cancel button, or you can not display the cancel button. But the other button is going to have just OK or some really default value that you cannot specify. Whereas this one has only one single button, but the text of that button is more specification. So minor differences, you just have to choose which one is more suitable for your application.
So.
What's the difference between message and text? Sorry. Show message dialogue and show text dialogue?
Yeah, they are pretty much the same. The only difference is what button is also presented in the dialog.
Oh, button text. Okay.
Yeah, so one allows you to customize the text on the button, and you only have one. The other one will have a default button, probably saying done or okay or something like that. And it gives you the option of whether you can cancel, quote unquote, cancel out of it or not. So it gives the end user a choice.
Does that ignore the error and allow them to keep the text within the box?
No, this is really just
Okay, so it's just button control.
It's button control.
Okay.
And to know which button the end user actually clicks needs a notifier. That's why we saw the notifier earlier. So let's say you pick this one, okay? Then you have to rely on a notifier, which is this one, which is after choosing. Then you know out of the choice whether the end user clicked OK or cancel. Then you have to decide what to do when cancel is clicked. or when OK is clicked. In other words, the dialog box does not interpret anything. There's no default thing to proceed to, and there's no default cancel action. You have to decide what to do with the click of those two buttons. So we'll talk about this next Wednesday. Next Monday is Labor Day. I won't be here, so you might want to be here just to catch Pokemon or get a few Pokeballs, but I won't be here. So I'll see you guys on next Wednesday. Meanwhile, I want you to continue to think about the project. Okay, so that's. Huh? Oh, we do have lab time today. Yes. So we'll all be going to room. I keep forgetting 126.
Sending us all on our way.
It sounded like
Yeah.
a goodbye.
Yeah, well, yeah, because some people actually leave right after this class.
But why? Then they don't get to do the lineup.
Yep. All right, so I'll see you guys over at the lab. Okay, if you have questions or if you want to work on your project or if you want to further the discussion of the logcat and stuff like that, we'll do that. No, I did not pass the sign-in sheet. I forgot again.